The sharp sound of breaking glass broke the morning silence, startling me. I was in the kitchen, thoughtfully looking at a cup of cold tea on the table. Suddenly, this noise pulled me out of my thoughts. I put down the cup and rushed to the living room, my heart pounding. Disturbing thoughts raced through my mind, and I feared it could be a burglar breaking into the house. The wind had blown up some vases that I hadn't yet had time to arrange. Running to the window overlooking the garden, I saw a different scene than I expected. Among the neat flower beds and well-maintained plants, there was a dirty, skinny dog, digging in the garden. One of the garbage bags had been torn, and food scraps were scattered on the grass. The chaos contrasted sharply with my grandmother's garden, which she had replaced with flowers that would delight with their vibrant bloom. The sacred corner had been turned into a mess without hesitation. I opened the door and shouted, "Get out!" "Of here!" The dog abruptly raised his head, his ears perked up. He looked at me, but there was no fear or aggression in his gaze, and there was a strange mixture of despair and defiance in his eyes, as if he were saying, "This is my last chance." I froze, my own words echoing in my head. Anger began to give way to something else, barely perceptible. Maybe it was compassion, or maybe the loneliness reflected in his eyes suddenly became close and understandable. Taking a step back, I didn't know what to do. The dog didn't move, staring at me intently, as if weighing whether to trust me. Taking a deep breath, I turned and went into the house, opening the closet where the old blankets were kept. When I returned, the dog was still standing at the edge of the garden, motionless like a statue. I carefully knelt down. I held out the blanket and softly said, "Come here, I won't hurt you." For a moment, I thought he might run away, but instead, he took a cautious step. Then, when he got close enough, I reached out and touched him. His body felt warm, but so fragile, like it was made of bones only. Carefully picking him up in my arms, I was surprised at how light he was. I returned to the house, where the smell of dirt and street filled the air. For some reason, his presence didn't feel strange even at home, as if the silence was no longer oppressive. I took the dog to the bathroom, where its smell, a mixture of earth, garbage, and street life, filled the space. My first thought was to wash him, but I wondered how he would react. Placing him on the floor, I turned on the water to fill the bathtub. The sound of running water made him tense, and he made a soft, plaintive noise. "It'll be okay," I said, kneeling beside him. The dog tried to move away, but her movements were careful, as if she was afraid to make me uncomfortable. I waited until the dog calmed down a little, then carefully lifted her up and lowered her into warm water. At first, she tensed up as if she was preparing to resist, but after a few minutes, she began to relax. I gently applied shampoo, massaging her dirty fur. Under the layers of dirt, scars appeared that seemed to tell her story. There was an old scar on her left side and a healed but still noticeable cut on her right ear. "You've been through a lot," I said quietly, not waiting for an answer. The dog looked at me with her big, deep eyes. There was something in her gaze that touched me deeply. When I finished washing her and wrapped her in a clean towel, there was no longer a dirty, emaciated dog. From the garden, this creature looked tired, but there was a barely noticeable difference in her eyes. A spark of hope, as if she believed in the best. I arranged a temporary place for her to sleep on the living room floor, using an old blanket. While she was settling in, I went to the kitchen and opened a can of tuna. It was all I could find. She ate the food slowly, as if trying to stretch out the moment. Instead of devouring the food as I had expected, she ate it carefully with some unexpected grace and dignity. When she finished, I put the empty can away and returned to the living room. She was already curled up on the blanket. In my new space, her smooth, quiet breathing filled the room. Sitting on the couch, for the first time in a long while, I felt that the house had really become cozy. Before the oppressors woke me up in the morning, a quiet, barely audible bark woke me. Opening my eyes, I saw a dog standing next to the sofa. Her tail was slightly wagging, and there was curiosity in her eyes. "Are you hungry?" I asked, sipping my drink with a smile on my face. Of course, she didn't answer, but her eyes spoke more eloquently than words. I went into the kitchen and found some food for her, carefully watching every move she made. There was something special about this creature, something that made it impossible not to notice. After breakfast, I decided we both needed some fresh air. I didn't have a leash, but I found an old belt that would fit a dog. She was wary at first, but soon she let me put it on. We went outside. The morning was cool, with the sun's rays filtering through the treetops. She walked beside me attentively, studying every corner as if she wanted to memorize every scent. "Who are you?" I asked quietly as we stopped at a large oak tree. Of course, she didn't answer, but she looked at me as if she understood. When we got home, she seemed much calmer, as if the walk had helped her feel more confident. I, too, felt strangely relieved that evening as I worked. At the computer, I noticed the dog had settled down at my feet. Every now and then, she raised her head and looked at me. I couldn't help but smile in response. I gently stroked her, and she seemed content. The next day, I woke up with a newfound lightness. The dog I now called Max filled my house with warmth that I had long missed. After breakfast, I decided it was time to learn more about her. Yesterday's incident at the park still lingered in my mind. Max's behavior and her reaction to a stranger I didn't even know made us curious. We took another walk, this time paying closer attention to her behavior. Max was calm, but each time we approached strangers, her gaze became strained. Suddenly, she stopped in front of one. At home, her ears rose and her muscles tensed, and he growled softly, calmly, looking at the windows. I said, stroking his head, softly, "Max, don't worry. Everything will be okay." Max did not take his eyes off the house, but he seemed to calm down a bit. Until I gently pulled on his leash when we returned home, I realized that I could no longer ignore such moments. His behavior clearly indicated that he had experienced something that was still a part of his life. That evening, I sat down at the computer to learn more about how injuries can affect the behavior of dogs. It turned out that animals that have been through difficult circumstances can show unexpected reactions in similar situations. This was the first step towards understanding, but I realized that it was not enough. The next day, I decided to take Max to the vet to make sure that everything was in order with his health and perhaps get advice on how to deal with his injuries. At the clinic, Max was a little nervous, but generally behaved calmly. The veterinarian confirmed that he was physically absolutely healthy. However, after listening to my stories about his strange behavior, he advised me to contact a shelter where they could help him. The story and sometimes knowledge of an animal's past can be frightening, the veterinarian said with a kind smile. I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out what Max had gone through, but I knew it was important. When I got home, I spent a long time thinking about it. Finally, I decided to call the shelter. The woman who answered the call was very friendly and immediately remembered Max. She said he had been found outside the city near an abandoned house. It looked like he had lived there for a long time, but they didn't know exactly what had happened to him. The house clearly meant something to Max, and I wondered if it was a place where he felt safe, or if it was the source of his pain that night. For the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about Max and his past. In the morning, I decided we needed a distraction. I remembered an old family house that had been empty for a long time and thought it would be fun to go there. The place where I spent many happy moments as a child seemed like a perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. We packed up and set off, and Max looked both surprised and curious as we drove. He stared intently out the car window, catching every new sound and studying the landscapes passing by. When we arrived, the house seemed almost the same as I remembered it. A large, slightly dilapidated house surrounded by an overgrown garden welcomed us with a wave. Memories of when I had come there swept over me as soon as I stepped inside. Max immediately rushed to explore every room, making me smile. We devoted that day to cleaning, and Max didn't take a step away from helping me put the house in order. His energy and joy filled me with inspiration as I prepared breakfast. He lay quietly nearby, watching me, as if he felt this place was special to us. After breakfast, I decided to explore the rest of the house. I went into one of the rooms and discovered an old library that was covered in dust. While looking at the shelves, I noticed a large box that belonged to my grandfather. At the bottom of the box, I found a photograph that made my heart skip a beat. In the photo, my grandfather was sitting on a bench outside the house, and next to him was a dog that looked remarkably like Max. I sat on the floor, holding the photo in my hands. Was it a coincidence, or could Max really be related to me family? I showed the photo to Max and said, "It's you," not expecting an answer. Max licked the photograph and sighed softly, resting his head on my lap. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that maybe it was real and not just a figment of my imagination. I continued searching and found more evidence that connected Max to my family. One of the boxes containing my grandfather's belongings turned out to be an old collar with a faded engraving and a name written on it. Max, my dog, trembled in my hands when I picked it up. It couldn't have been a coincidence. It felt like the past had reached out to me, connecting me with something meaningful. I went downstairs, holding the collar. Max looked at me with amazing calmness, as if he knew what I had found. He examined the collar carefully and then lay down next to me. Among the letters, I found an address to my mother, in which my grandfather had written that Max was not just a pet to him, but a true friend and confidant. He mentioned that Max had always felt his mood, supported him in difficult moments, and stayed by his side until the very end. These words resonated with me deeply. Maybe Max was here to help me, as he had once helped his owner. I couldn't sleep that night. The final decision I made was that Max would stay with me forever. He had become more than just a friend to me. He had become a part of my soul and my story. I took Grandpa's old collar and carefully put it on Max. "Now you're definitely home," I whispered to Max as he tilted his head slightly and put it under my arm, seeming to understand the meaning of my words. This chapter of my life, full of amazing discoveries and emotions, had begun. But there were new days ahead, filled with joy and the creation of new memories. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity that had never been there before. The house no longer felt empty and gloomy. Instead, it came to life, filled with the sound of Max's footsteps, his quiet rasp in his sleep, and the light tap of his tail against the floor. We began the day with a morning walk, the sun's rays gently filtering through the leaves, the cool wind refreshing my face. Max was in his element, darting between the trees, stopping here and there to explore every corner. His energy turned out to be contagious. I found myself laughing heartily for the first time in a long time. After returning home, I decided to continue sorting out old things. Max was always there for me, carefully watching my every move in the attic. I came across several more boxes with letters and photographs that belonged to me, including a note that attracted my attention. My grandfather wrote in it that the house is not just walls and roof, but those who share joys and sorrows with you. If you feel lonely, look around. Maybe someone nearby is already making your house full. These words touched me deeply, and I thought about how the house that had seemed empty to me for so long had now become filled with meaning and brought life back to the place. After that, I began thinking seriously about the future. The house in the village seemed like a new beginning, like the perfect place to start a new chapter in my life. The city that I had left seemed distant and alien now. Here, in the midst of nature, I felt like I was gradually returning to myself. I made a list of things to do, such as repairing rooms, taking care of the garden, and creating comfortable conditions for Max. He deserves better. So with this thought in mind, I took him on a walk to the nearest village to buy everything we needed in the store. One of the visitors noticed Max and said, "He's a handsome dog." I smiled and nodded, replying that he's been through a lot, but now we'll be fine. Yes, he has been through a lot, but now he's home. While I did my shopping, Max waited patiently, his tail gently swaying from side to side as if he knew everything was meant for him. In the evening, we set up his corner together, and I felt a sense of peace and contentment. This is where we belong, I thought, and I was grateful for this new beginning. Max laid out his new toys. He settled down on the mat, and one of them ended up in his mouth. This simple moment of him finding his place in the house filled me with joy. With a smile, I looked at Grandpa's old collar that was hanging on the wall, as a symbol of the connection between past and present. Max came up to me and put his head on my lap, sighing softly. "You were here at the right time," I whispered, gently stroking his head. "Thank you for finding me." It took a few days, but Max and I soon became a real team. We walked through the forest in the morning, worked in the garden in the afternoon, and rested in the evenings. The garden began to bloom again, and it seemed like the whole house was alive with Max. Sometimes, when I looked at him, I remembered my grandfather and the warm memories we shared. Max became not only a friend, but also a reminder of family values and how important they are. It is important to keep in touch with our roots. One evening, sitting by the fireplace, I thought about how my life would have turned out if this house had remained empty and I had continued to live in the hustle and bustle of the city, lost in endless daily life. But now, everything was different. Max turned to me, sensing my thoughts. His eyes radiated understanding. I smiled and held out my hand, saying, "You and I have come a long way," petting him. I knew that there were many more happy times ahead of us. It was at that moment that Max appeared in my life to remind me of love, hope, and that even in difficult times, there is always an opportunity to start over. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with others who appreciate touching stories. If you want to see more interesting content, please subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to stay up to date with all the new content. Thank you for your attention. We hope to see you soon.